Let's dive right into this explainer. I want you to picture the city beneath your feet, not just as a cold, static collection of concrete tunnels and copper wires, but as a massive, invisible living organism. We're talking specifically about the New York City subway and the massive power grid that keeps it alive. This is a system that literally breathes. It circulates millions of people every single day, and it relies on this incredibly fragile, invisible nervous system of electricity and information just to survive. So today, we're going to dissect this organism.
We've got three main areas to cover today. First up, designing the underground. Then we'll look at mapping the labyrinth. And finally, we'll talk about the ultimate stress test, the 1965 blackout.
To truly get this, you have to wrap your head around the sheer scale we're dealing with here, which is just staggering. 472 stations, 26 different lines. The New York City subway is basically an ecosystem all its own, pulsating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Once you grasp the physical magnitude of this infrastructure, you quickly realize just how incredibly high the stakes are for designing it, organizing it, and, well, keeping the lights on.
All right, part one, designing the underground, evolution of form.
The physical shape of this underground world has changed so drastically over time. When the system first opened back in 1904, it was basically pitched as a subterranean palace. I mean, the star attraction was the original City Hall station, absolutely decked out in gorgeous Gustavino tiles and sweeping arches. But as the system expanded like wildfire through the early 1900s, things had to get a lot more pragmatic. They started using these shallow cut-and-cover trenches. Workers literally just dug up the street, laid the tracks down, and built a roof right over them. Fast forward to 2017, though, and it's a completely different story. We see a massive leap in engineering with the ultra-deep, cavernous, column-free stations of the 2nd Avenue expansion.
But let's go back to those early days for a second, because the designers placed such a huge premium on aesthetics. You have to remember, they were trying to entice a pretty skeptical public to travel deep down into the earth, so they made it feel majestic. They used that vaulted Guastavino tile arching, laid out in this stunning herringbone pattern that just gleamed under the new electric lights. There were these intricate Beaux Arts plaques hiding in plain sight, like little beavers honoring John Jacob Astor's fur trade fortune. And up on the street level, commuters walked through these beautiful domed Art Nouveau entrance kiosks for the original IRT line. The whole shebang was designed to feel like a premium, almost magical experience. And the engineering contrast over the last century is wild. Think about the early IRT line, built with that shallow cut-and-cover excavation. Because those trenches were less than 20 feet deep and sitting directly under the pavement, they absolutely had to use those heavy, thick support columns you see everywhere in the older stations. It makes the space tight, it echoes, and it's visually super cluttered. Compare that to the modern 2nd Avenue subway expansion. To build those, engineers brought in massive boring machines to carve out tunnels way, way deeper underground. The result? These incredibly modern, airy, entirely column-free spaces. It's a complete evolution of the underground form. But here's the catch. Beautiful architecture doesn't mean a thing if people have no idea where they're going.
Which brings us nicely to part two, mapping the labyrinth, making sense of the underground.
This was the ultimate headache for transit officials. See, the original subway wasn't built as one cohesive system. It was actually a fractured network built by three fiercely competing companies, the IRT, the BMT, and the city-owned IND. In 1940, the city finally stepped in and merged them all together. But merging them on paper, that was the easy part. Actually physically integrating their navigation systems left behind this chaotic, overlapping mess of disjointed signs. So you have to ask, how do you map that? How do you take three totally different visual languages and translate them into one functional nervous system? If you rode the subway before the 1960s, you were facing absolute visual chaos. Platforms and staircases were just plastered with decades of conflicting, overlapping signs from those three old agencies. We're talking different fonts, mismatched colors, completely different naming rules. It was a mess. But then in 1966, the Transit Authority hired a design firm called Unimark International, and they came in and just ruthlessly standardized everything. They introduced that iconic white-on-black sans serif font that honestly feels like it's woven into the city's DNA today. They built a visual language that seamlessly guided you from the sidewalk, down the stairs, and onto your train with actual logic. Now, Unimark didn't just pull this out of thin air. They really stood on the shoulders of some brilliant early pioneers. Back in 1957, a graphic designer named George Salomon was so frustrated with the subway that he submitted an unsolicited report literally called Out of the Labyrinth. A year later, he designed a map using a Beckian grid. That's a style inspired by Harry Beck's famous London Underground map, the one that looks like a circuit board and prioritizes clean geometry over literal above-ground geography. Then, in 1964, a lawyer named Raleigh Dadamo won a contest by arguing that the city needed to ditch its old three-color mapping method, which was just stubbornly clinging to the old IRT, BMT, and IND routes. Add to that a deep 1965 study by Professor Stanley P. Goldstein on typography, and the stage was perfectly set for a massive design revolution.
And that revolution officially landed in August 1972. Enter the Vignelli map, designed by Massimo Vignelli and Bob Norda at Unimark. This thing wasn't really a map at all. It was a pure diagram. It boldly used straight lines at strict 45 and 90-degree angles. It intentionally ignored almost all surface details. No streets, no parks, just a beige background and water to show the edges of the city. And crucially, it color-coded the routes for crystal-clear navigation. It completely rewired how New Yorkers understood their underground world. But what happens when the lifeblood of this beautifully mapped organism suddenly just stops? That takes us to our final chapter. Part 3, the 1965 blackout, when the grid goes dark. Just to paint a picture of how catastrophic this was, it's the evening of Tuesday, November 9th, 1965. Suddenly, 30 million people lose power all at once. This outage blanketed an unbelievable 80,000 square miles across 8 U.S. states and Ontario, Canada. For up to 13 straight hours, the entire northeastern seaboard went completely, terrifyingly dark. At the time, it was the absolute largest power outage in North American history, completely paralyzing one of the most densely populated spots on the planet. So, how does a failure of that magnitude even happen? Believe it or not, it was a domino effect that took exactly 5 minutes. Step 1, up near Niagara Falls at the Sir Adam Beck plant, a single, totally mundane, misconfigured protection relay trips. Step 2, that electrical load suddenly shifts to neighboring lines, instantly overloading them. Step 3, all that excess power surges east like a tidal wave, overloading New York State's lines. And finally, Step 4, to stop their generators from being permanently destroyed, power stations detect the imbalance and trigger these cascading automatic shutdowns across the entire grid. 5 minutes, one tiny hardware error, half the continent goes dark. And the timing? Literally the worst. It hit just after 5 p.m., the absolute peak of the evening rush hour. 800,000. That is the staggering number of passengers who were instantly trapped in pitch-black subway cars when the power cut out. Trains just died between stations, stranded deep beneath the East River and locked under skyscrapers. This vibrant, living organism we've been talking about, it turned into an instant trap. And while all those folks were stuck underground, the entire region up on the surface was being pushed to its absolute limits. Get this, at the Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse, a backup generator failed, and surgeons literally had to finish operations using torchlight. It's such a jarring reality check. We are incredibly dependent on this invisible grid for literal life or death situations, and the second it fails, we are forced right back into low-tech, primal survival mode. Now, you'd probably expect total societal collapse in a city like New York during a sudden total blackout, right? Total chaos, yet. 5. According to the NYPD, there were only 5 reported cases of looting during the entire 13-hour ordeal. Honestly, the aftermath was remarkably peaceful. The NYPD actually recorded its lowest level of night crime in the city's history that night. Sure, they deployed 10,000 National Guard members and 5,000 off-duty cops just in case, but the overall move was uniquely calm. People just adapted. Commuters guided each other across the dark suspension bridges. The New York Times even managed this crazy feat of journalistic resilience by printing a slim 10-page paper using an unaffected printing press all the way across the river in New Jersey. The power system completely broke down, but the people sure didn't. So we've seen how the subway evolved from shallow, noisy trenches into deep, cavernous architectural marvels. We've seen how brilliant designers mapped a chaotic labyrinth to make it beautifully easy to navigate. And we've seen how a single misconfigured relay can rip the power away from 30 million people in 5 minutes. It all leaves us with a pretty provocative question. Next time you swipe your card and head down those stairs, ask yourself, what happens when the grid goes quiet? It's a pretty wild reminder of just how fragile yet absolutely vital the invisible systems all around us really are. Thanks for joining me for this explainer today. Catch you next time.